I got 3/4 of the way through denominating fraction wars before I realized I had made a big mistake. Hello, everyone. Bront, CatHerder here. We're having some fun talking Raid Shadow Legends, and we are here on the free to pause account. We are not here to compound fraction our problems anymore. We are here to talk about faction wars. Now, one of the things that you guys have actually somewhat repeatedly asked me for is I've been posting screenshots of my teams as I have been beating the faction wars here in Faction Wars, where I've been beating stage 21 with all 3 stars. Now, I've not posted anything where I've not beat it with all 3 stars, and there's a couple cases where I have. In fact, you can see right here, Skinwalkers, I'm at 61 stars. I cannot 3-star stage 21. I just don't have the champions to keep everyone alive. So that's fine, but what I've been trying to do is show you guys some of the ways I've beaten the bosses in stage 21, how I have built some of the teams, and several of you guys have asked for videos on specific factions. And honestly, I have done that. I'm going to do a link. I will do a link up above. I'll probably have a link down in the description below as well to my Derping Through Faction Wars series. It's one of the first series I ever did on the channel. It was inspired by something that helped me through Faction Wars many years ago, done by MTG Jedi, as well as a couple other content creators as well. But MTG Jedi was the one that was reliably doing it when I was going through Faction Wars, that I really, really appreciated him. So I made sure I did something, and in some ways borrowed some of his style from that as well. And so go check that out. That talks about all the champions that you could be using in Faction Wars, talks about whether or not the champions are good, how you can build some of the teams, and talking about specifically that faction's challenges in challenging stage 21. I could make one video again per faction, but I don't think that's going to do as well as giving you a good overall guide on how to Faction Wars. So in this video, we're going to talk about some of the general tips about how to Faction Wars. I will do some specific faction teams to give you some examples of how I'm doing it here on my free to play, and I'll show you a glimpse of my derp plan, which is a wonderful backronym, definitely a backronym, and it's it's a fun way to think about Faction Wars, and it's a fun way to look at the challenge of building Faction Wars teams. So my derp method of going through Faction Wars is all about team building, learning how to build teams, learning what you need to do to construct a team that is well-rounded in order to deal with the bosses specifically. But honestly, it helps with all of the stages as well. And it's got 4 key points. We have damage. You need to do damage to kill your enemy. Pretty straightforward, but if you're built to survive and not do damage, it's going to be certain stages are going to be really, really tough for you. And some of the bosses, if you can't do enough damage to kill the boss, you're going to be stuck on that boss forever. There's a couple bosses that can actually be really, really problematic if you can't do enough damage. You've got enhancers. Enhancers are folks that buff you and debuff your enemies, and they are ones that make the damage easier, but they make staying alive easier as well. They bring your increased attack, your increased defense, your decreased attack, your decreased defense. Even control debuffs can be very helpful. They can kind of fall under the enhancers as well. We have revivers here. Revivers are going to keep you alive. Some of the bosses, you're going to need a reviver. Some of the bosses, if you can get away without a reviver, then that's great as well. But doing it without a reviver is a much higher margin for victory. It's a much higher threshold for failure, I should say, where you could easily have a problem. And if you're not going to, get somebody alive, you're going to restart the entire run without a reviver. So having a reviver can make the run significantly easier, give you a lot more margin for, somebody can die and it's not going to be the end of the run and you have to start over again. So revivers are a huge lifeline, particularly when you're trying to 3-star the stages and have to have everyone alive at the end of the stage. And then finally, protectors. Protectors provide your heals, your buffs, and your control. These are the ones that help keep you alive. The enemy, if they're not taking turns, well, then they're not doing damage. If you're healing your champions, well, then they're hopefully not going to die, so you're going to not need that reviver quite as often. They're going to bring some of the buffs that are going to keep you protected from debuffs as well, stuff like that. Maybe cleanses can be in the protectors as well. So that is my derp method. It is a great way of building teams. Honestly, it works anywhere in the game, but for Faction Wars, it is definitely something you want to identify. You want to identify champions that do specific things in factions that are going to get you through the boss. Now, the bosses are certainly one of the more difficult parts of faction wars. The bosses can, be interesting to deal with. They can be difficult for specific factions in some cases. They are different depending on what stage 21 you are facing. Different stages and different factions have different bosses at each of the 3 stages. So not everyone's going to have the same boss at the top, but every faction has a consistent boss at the top, and that definitely can be difficult for certain factions. Now, let's break down the bosses specifically here. I've got all of them here. I've got slides on all of them here. These are from my derp series, as I talked about beforehand. The yellow boss is kind of the control boss. So this boss wants to keep you controlled. You will constantly be frozen. You will constantly be feared. You will constantly be provoked. You'll have ads that will put block damage up on the boss, for example, and will keep the boss clean from debuffs. And so one of the tricks with this one is to slowly but surely whittle down the ads so you can't get that block damage up or some of the buffs up, while ideally keeping your team cleansed with things like block debuffs, or just being fast enough to be able to outrun some of these debuffs and get around them. It helps also if you can cleanse buffs on the other team so that you can get rid of some of the buffs that might show up on the boss. Overall, this is an average one. So this one can be very difficult for some teams, but overall, if you've got a good derp team where you've got the healing, the revive, and the cleansing, as long as your reviver doesn't die, you can eventually outlast this boss and beat this boss. The blue boss is the ally attack boss, and this one is probably one of the most dangerous ones. This one is going to challenge your team to be able to outlast some of these big nukes from the ally attack. So you're going to want to find ways to either nullify or stun, freeze, some other way control the ads so that they cannot do the ally attack when this boss does that ally attack. Because the ads actually do almost as much damage, if not more damage, than the boss, and it's AoE, so it can be very, very difficult to get through if those ads are taking a turn. So if you can somehow control them, and unfortunately provoke does not work against the minions or the ads as it were, so you can't provoke them, you're going to use freeze or stun. You can also certainly use things like decrease attack will certainly help mitigate a lot of the damage for you. Ally protection could be very helpful as well, block damage. Ways to mitigate damage, shields can be very helpful as well. The other thing about this boss is this boss revives these ads once you kill them. So while killing them is actually a very good method of control, what you want to do is you want to maybe kill one of the ads, let him revive that one, kill the other ad, and then maybe work on the boss / kill the other ad while he cannot revive anybody else. And that will certainly help you push forward and beat this boss without having to soak so much damage that it is very difficult for you to survive. The red boss, this is the nuking boss. This boss will one-shot or two-shot almost any champion in the game. There are very few champions that can actually take a shot from the red boss and live more than 2 hits. It is very difficult, and without things like ally protection or shields or block damage, this can be a very tough boss to beat. This boss also will stun everyone but one target, and that one target will get true feared, and then he will attack, and then he will do a second attack, then he will do a third attack, and then he will do the staggering recovery ability where he will lock everyone out again. You do need to be very careful of him. The other problem you're going to have with this boss is when you do damage to this boss, he gets turn meter boost. So you see it's 2% turn meter boost for her 1% of the HP they lose. So unless you one-shot this boss, which is not easy to do, he's going to take at least 1 turn. So having a reviver able to bring back that dead champion is going to be very helpful, assuming somebody dies from this. Having ally protection and being able to get that out before he takes this first turn. Ally protection will almost certainly negate 2, 3, maybe even 4 hits of this boss, giving you time to get through and beat this boss and control him. Working on turn meter control is another way to help with this boss, but turn meter control can only go so far because you're also doing damage with that turn meter control, so he's constantly pushing his turn meter up significantly. Plus, he cleanses himself when he does his staggering recovery, which is unfortunate because that means that things like poisons, they'll do damage the first turn, but then he'll cleanse them and he won't have them. He also won't have decrease attack on for that first big hit. So things like block damage, unkillable, ally protection, great ways to keep your people alive. Even shields would be very helpful here as well. Those are probably some of the best defenses against this boss. And the rest of it is going to be things like turn meter control and mostly just managing damage and having revivers. And to be fair, this is one of the toughest bosses because this boss can sometimes just target your reviver. And if your reviver is not protected, infected, you lose your reviver, well, it's game over if you're looking for 3 stars. The green boss is the debuff boss. He is the damage over time boss specifically, and he is both one of the easiest ones to beat and one of the hardest ones to 3-star, because if you don't have a way to mitigate all the poison and burn damage that you are going to take, he is going to be very difficult to beat. So because every time you hit him, you can get burn placed on your champions for 1 turn. And then of course everybody burns, and then everyone's taking some extra HP. And if you've got 5 champions burning and all 5 of them take turns, that's 25% of their max HP they have lost. That's huge. Healers can help mitigate that almost entirely. Revivers can certainly help keep everyone alive as well. Block debuffs is key for this particular boss as well. But this is one of the few bosses that can do damage to you even if you don't let this boss take a turn, which can be very, very difficult as well. This boss does also have some adds with him as well, I believe, which can make him somewhat difficult, but it's not the worst case scenario with the adds, and he doesn't revive them, so they can die, and it's not a big deal. You're really, really looking for healing when you're dealing with a green boss. Some level of healing is going to be very helpful, if not mandatory. Cleansing is an even better way to go about dealing with this boss. Finally, the purple boss, which is arguably one of the most difficult bosses in the game in Faction Wars. Attacks all enemies, and he basically is going to put fear on people. He'll do a debuff spread where he will swap buffs with a target champion and then spread all the debuffs he has onto everyone else as well. Basically cleanses all the debuffs for all the buffs from everybody. It's really kind of weird, but basically the end result is any buffs that you have will end up on him, and any debuffs he has will end up on you. And it's very difficult to deal with. This can steal block damage, which can be bad. This can steal unkillable, which can be annoying. This can steal ally protection, which is a great way to get your own champion killed while you're doing some damage. All kinds of frustrating ways to deal with this boss. Plus, when this boss gets under about 25% HP, he will do an HP swap with your highest HP percent champion, swapping the HP percentage, feeling him mostly to full, assuming your champions were mostly full, putting possibly your tankiest champion almost ready to die, which is a good way to lose a reviver. And now you have 12 turns to kill him. This is where things like the destroy set used to be very valuable, because if you were struggling to do enough damage, somebody in the destroy set would be able to bring his max HP down to a significant level, and that would mean that you would have less damage you would overall need to do when he did the HP swap to be able to kill him. So you might have to let him swap once or twice with the max HP reduction, but overall, eventually he would become easy enough to kill that you should be able to catch up with him and kill him in those 12 turns. Now, with things like speed getting easier, damage getting easier, things like the Great Hall, and other new things that you can do to increase your stats and have a better time in Faction Wars, well, he has gotten to be a much easier boss. But if he's one of the first bosses you are fighting on stage 21, and honestly even on the earlier stages, on stage 14, you can fight this guy as well. He's not quite as rough on stage 14, but he could be very rough for a couple of people on a couple of factions depending on how your team is built. So watch out for the purple boss. Looking to start a brand new account in 2025 with Raid? Use my link down below, set up a new account with a brand new email, and you can start off with Elenarl, a wonderful legendary that can do all kinds of fun stuff for you. And at level 15, you'll also get a Tagore, a wonderful support reviver who has been a big carry for me on my accounts. You also use the code Demon Slayer to get Tholan as well, and to get Lemonisi at the moment, because Lemonisi is currently the free login champion. Start yourself off with 3 great legendaries and a wonderful epic, and enjoy starting a brand new raid journey in 2025. Now, one of the big tips that I did mention in that other part there is that, you're going to have a great haul and you've got these wonderful area bonuses. If you're doing any live arena, you can get decent stuff in your Faction Wars pretty easy, because this stuff is really, really cheap. Now, you don't necessarily have to get the plus 10 here. So I've got, plus 20 speed. That's huge. I've got some extra crit damage. I've got some extra ignore defense. It's all huge, all really, really helpful. But honestly, just if you got these things to level 3, that's, 6% extra attack, 6% extra defense, 6% extra HP, an extra 24 accuracy. All of those things are going to make it easier for you to build champions in Faction Wars. And since Faction Wars Hard is now a thing, Faction Wars Hard will need incredibly incredibly high stats where you're going to need these to be closer to maxed out to be usable and to really, get through Faction Wars hard mode. Faction Wars hard mode makes this stuff evergreen uses for your stat bonuses. But getting Lydia is so important that even the early on version of these things, it's not the worst thing in the world. But as you can see on my free-to-play account here, I have invested heavily in Faction Wars, and these are super, super good for helping you get teams through Faction Wars. So one of the most recent ones, in fact, the most recent faction I have beaten on this particular account is the Sylvan Watchers. I had gotten all the way to stage 20, but I couldn't beat stage 21. And I finally was able to beat stage 21 recently because Lemonisi brought some additional damage to my team. Now, I think she was level 40 when I had her. I did not have a lot of masteries on her. This build is pretty close to what I had on her, though. Very, very high speed, I'll admit. This is kind of nuts on the speed, but I built her with some crit rate and some damage because she's a direct damage dealer, and she brought enough damage to help bring me to the boss. But overall, this team has got a little bit of everything. So we've got a reviver and a healer in Tree Shield Knot. Tree Shield Knot is a great, great rare for this. And one of the things I will tell you that you will need to do for your revivers and especially your healers on a lot of these factions is you are probably going to need to book them. So I booked him. I mean, he's a rare, so rare book's not super exciting, but Renan is another option as well. Renan is actually a pretty good champion. I just needed the extra healing that Knot brought, and I like Knot's revive. But she's got a revive dead ally with 50% HP and 30% turn meter and a continuous heal on that ally, which is not a bad revive. I would have had to book this down to 4 turn cooldown though, because the ability to only revive one target champion could be problematic. And that's actually one of the nice things that Knot brings. He can revive 2 allies, although its revive is a 5 turn cooldown and it's only 25% HP and 25% turn meter. They do get a 20% shield, which at least is not too bad. Renan also gives you the turn meter control, so she gives you 15% turn meter and increased speed. Very good ability, 4 turn cooldown. I wish this was a 3 turn cooldown, but otherwise not too bad. And does some decrease attack on the A1. So Renan does some useful stuff, but Tree Shield Knot also has a 3 turn heal and increased defense. Even if it is the small increased defense helps keep everyone alive, and the healing can get pretty decent, even if it's only 15% plus an additional 20% based off of that there. You can give him some masteries if you want to. And overall, I decided to put him with Indomitable Spirit just because I was worried about him being stunned against this particular boss, because this is the boss that can actually just, kill people directly. And I figured maybe if I had a chance for him to get out of that stun or provoke, that would be very helpful. So I gave him this. It was a viable option for a blessing. But I've got the reviver and a healer there. I've got Bowsmith Flannan, who does a decent amount of damage, but he also has turn meter control and a stun on the A1 and decreased speed on the A2. He's got an ally attack with increased accuracy as well, which can be very helpful. So he brings a good amount of utility for a rare, so I thought he was a good champion, and I've had him built for a long time on this account. He's been super valuable. And again, it's actually kind of nice to have 2 rares in my Faction Wars team here. Croydon the Blue, I had built him for other content as well, but he brings me the AoE freeze and a single target freeze. And then for the boss, he brings me this important turn meter boost and increased speed on a 3 turn cooldown. One of the reasons that Renan was not as important is I already had that ability with Croydon the Blue. I didn't need her increased speed as much as I needed the revive and I needed the extra heal. Ruella was honestly probably MVP in this faction because this ability to steal turn meter is huge. Yes, it's only 5% of the target's turn meter, but it's effectively 15%, and she steals it. So she pushes her own turn meter up by 15% as well, meaning that if you build her fast enough, she can keep going and can generally keep the enemy's team under control. She also does have an enemy turn meter fill with some increased crit rate as well. If you need extra damage with the increased crit rate, that doesn't suck. And then finally, she has a decreased speed with weaken and decreased defense. The decreased speed being very viable against the boss as well, because that's one way to keep the boss from taking turns is just decrease their speed, then they're gaining less turn meter overall. And finally, I actually used the Tempest Sanguinius on here that gives turn meter reduction boosts. It's a total of 18%. Doesn't seem like a lot, but its turn meter reduction effect, because it's a steal, she's getting it back, I think, as well. It's a little extra turn meter the enemy didn't get when they needed him to. And again, then we brought Lemonisi for damage. I was using Kellen the Shrike. Kellen the Shrike is okay for damage, but not great. Lemonisi, much better for damage. And I didn't have to book her. I have this just because I wanted to keep her possibly alive a little bit, so that was just something that gave her some extra damage with the attack, and something that, other than that, I didn't have to book her. I didn't really have to do much with the masteries. As you can see I actually haven't even bought a mastery yet on her, so I don't have a lot going on there. And she's built as a damage dealer. So that's the kind of teams we're talking about building for Faction Wars. Something like this. I'll throw it. Let's try another faction as well, just kind of show you what we're dealing with. Sacred Order is another one I got. This is one of the ones I got early because Alice was a huge carry. And Alice as a huge carry damage dealer can show you how good a good damage dealer in Faction Wars can carry you without needing a lot of other great support. That said, what I found was super helpful as well is once I got Ludex was the key to beating this faction. Now, Ludex was a 5-star when I did this. I don't think I had books in any of his skills, but what I needed was this extra healing that he had on the A1. I needed him to be generally fast, and it was nice to have the emergency revive when I needed it. So overall, Ludex did everything I needed, was very helpful, and again, good example of a reviver and a healer. But of course, he's got this increased strengthen and increased attack, which is a great buff as well, and the turn meter is good, very helpful. Templar, got a booked Templar. I built him for some other stuff. He is 6 stars, and that's probably the only reason he was involved in my Faction Wars team. As a 6-star champion with full masteries, he actually does a decent amount of damage, mostly because of War Master against the bosses. He's built tanky. He's built basically so I don't have to worry about him not surviving, and that is really all he was there to do. He was a champion who wasn't going to die, who was going to bring a little bit of extra single target damage, and gave me somebody that could possibly be targeted, mitigating some of the damage that somebody else might take, while hopefully not dying. Glycea, you'll notice that Glycea right now doesn't have any boots. I don't use her for much of anything, but I did use her in Faction Wars, and I did need her for Faction Wars because she has a block debuffs. And I found the block debuffs to be very, very helpful, even on a 5-turn cooldown. The rest of the stuff, not particularly exciting. You'll see she isn't even ascended at the moment, and she was fast-ish. It was around 190, 200-ish speed once I had boots on her as well. Enough accuracy to land some debuffs. The control was helpful, but not required. There were plenty of other champions that would have fit the bill as well as Glycea did, but because Glycea came as a 5-star champion, which meant I didn't have to get her to 5 stars, and she has the block debuffs that was useful, she became very easy for me to use in this faction. And finally, I absolutely hate Adriel. I think she's a horrible champion, but I needed another healer because I had Alice and not much else. And so as long as I could keep Alice upright and alive, I had a chance to beat this boss. And so I brought Adriel. I didn't book her, but she does have a 4-turn cooldown, decent heal for 20% heal. It's 20% of their max HP, so it's not as good as it could be. And reflect damage, which I guess doesn't suck. And then she has a chance to do decrease attack kinda with this one. And honestly, the aura didn't suck too badly because it gave Alice some extra 21 speed. Overall, Adriel was there because it was somebody who could give additional healing, because the other option for me was Mistress of Hymns. And while Mistress of Hymns has a revive, it's not a great revive. And while she has a continuous heal on the 2 allies with the lowest HP, the continuous heal is not super exciting. It's on a 4-turn cooldown. It only helps 2 champions, and I don't have control over who it helps. And it's only those 2 champions. And then this is based off of damage inflicted, which means it might as well not exist because she doesn't do that much damage. So just not a great champion overall. But yeah, a great damage dealer in Alice managed to carry this team through Faction Wars with a little bit of healing and the rest of it some decent support and otherwise control. And that's the type of stuff you can do with your Faction Wars team. Sometimes you're going to struggle without finding the right champions, but it means sometimes you're going to invest in champions that you don't like otherwise. If I had to 5-star Adriel to make this work, and that was the only key I need, or Mistress of Hymns, I was ready to do that because Faction Wars, completing Faction Wars is just so helpful. I fortunately did not have to do that, and as you can see here, now with a 6-star Ludex and a 6-star Alice, this is still a full auto level 20 team, even with champions that aren't fully geared anymore, because that's how important those champions are and how good those champions are for these things. So let's talk a little bit about building the champions that you're going to be using for Faction Wars. So I want to highlight Tree Shield Knot, because Tree Shield Knot is actually in what I would call a good Faction War Reviver build. And that is basically very, very high speed, so he can get back to his abilities quickly. Don't really care about the accuracy of the resistance too much. And that's going to go for champions even such as like a Broad Maw, who's got a freeze on his A1, for example, or any other champion that has debuffs as a reviver. Unless their debuffs are incredibly critical, such as like a Scylla the Drake's stun, I don't worry too too much about the accuracy, and I would much rather have them make sure they are staying alive and lose out on a debuff of some kind than make sure they can land a debuff and they might just die instead because they aren't going to be tanky enough to heal. Now you'll notice I've got 4 pieces of Immortal. Well, that's great. The other option would be a regeneration set, would certainly be better, or a bolster set or something along those lines. Guardian set would not be too horrible as well. Guardian set I'm not a huge fan of on revivers necessarily because they're going to be taking some damage as a result of that, but it can give you a good amount of healing as well. So depending on how your sets are and depending on how tanky you can make your champion, Guardian set's not necessarily a bad set either. Basically, your healer / reviver, or at least, maybe both your healer and your reviver, but whoever is keeping your team alive needs to be able to go fast enough to help keep your team alive. So you're going to want a good amount of speed. You're going to want to book their abilities so that they're not on such long cooldowns you can't get back to them. And you're going to want HP and defense, which means you're going to go HP and defense, gloves and chest. And honestly, you're going to want to go with HP on one and defense on the other in most cases, because high HP means nothing if you're going to be taking a ton of damage because of a low defense. So mixing your defense and HP a little bit gives you overall better survivability for champions like this. Now, for champions that might not be 6 stars, that you can only get so many stats on that you need them to be able to land debuffs, well, that's where some of your accuracy chests are going to come in. Otherwise, you're going to want champions that have speed control or various controls. You're going to want them pretty fast. Now, again, mine here is 237 for Rilla. Yes, I realize that's a little fast for some people, but you are looking for over 200 speed on all of these champions, and you're honestly looking for closer to 220 on some of your debuffers and your revivers and healers if you can, because that is going to let you lap the enemy multiple times on the waves, and for the bosses, that's going to guarantee that you always get at least 1 turn when the boss takes a turn, if not 2 in some cases, and that can be the difference between reviving somebody that you need to revive and not, and having somebody else die instead. And finally, this is a Faction Wars damage dealer build. Now, I did put some accuracy on her because she can land some debuffs. Her debuffs were not super important because block buffs, very helpful, but not necessarily critical in most situations. Was helpful against the boss in a couple cases where they can buff themselves, but probably not super important. Otherwise, your damage dealers, you're going to want to build them with a reasonable amount of speed. Now, the fact that I've got 240 whatever speed, that's probably overkill. The fact that I got that much speed on her with this much crit damage and crit rate was kind of impressive, honestly, but I managed to do it, so I wasn't going to complain about it too much. And you're going to want to get a 100% crit rate. You really don't want to rely on things like the increased crit rate buff. The only increased crit rate you would ever want to rely on for Faction Wars is if you have an aura for increased crit rate, and that's the aura you're going to use. That said, I would much rather use a speed aura or an attack aura or an accuracy aura to help make the builds easier for everybody else in general and to add more damage or more utility or just more speed. I prefer to build with the 100% crit rate, and so if I'm expecting somebody to have to do damage, like, Lemonisi here, you're going to go with that 100% damage. You're going to go with 100% crit rate. You're going to want to go with a good amount of crit damage. And honestly, yes, if you can manage to be tanky enough with an attack chest, that's fine. But you'll note with her, I've got an HP ring that it does happen to have some attack percent bonuses on it, but this is a very tanky defensive ring that will help keep her alive. So I compromised a little bit on damage to make sure that she didn't die, because if my damage dealer is so squishy that she's going to constantly be dying, it's going to drag the team down. And then finally, for your controls, again, you want them fast. You want the accuracy to be there. You want to, if you can build for damage, damage doesn't hurt, but otherwise you're going to want them to be tanky because you don't want them to not die. That is really the thing with Faction Wars, is because you're trying to get those 3 stars. You do need to worry about the survivability of every single champion on your team. Having a squishy single target damage dealer is fine. Just realize that you may have to revive that squishy single target damage dealer repeatedly against the boss. And if you have to do that, then you have to do that. That's fine. But again, high speed, over 200, high accuracy. Honestly, you're looking to get to 225 accuracy for floor 21. So you're not needing this 300 and whatever accuracy I have on Croydon, but I've got it because I can, and it fits in pretty well with what I've got here. Put him in the collection here. I've got him with enough accuracy. This is an HP chest. This is a resistance banner. It just happens to be one that gives him some speed and attack and gives him some bonuses for being a pinpoint piece. It's fine to put random gear on people, but you really do, especially towards the end of Faction Wars, going to stage 21, you're going to want to make sure that you have a dedicated damage dealer that's doing a decent amount of speed to be able to go, and you're going to want to make sure that the rest of your team is not super slow. Because if your champion is slow, you're going to struggle to get revives off, you're going to struggle to keep your team alive. That was part of the problem before I had beat this with Tree Shield Knot. Tree Shield Knot, I redid his build and added about 50 speed to his build. He was under 200 speed, which was good enough to get where I got to stage 20, but was not good enough through stage 21. I needed that extra speed, and that extra speed came in clutch because the turn before I killed the boss, he revived 2 dead allies, and that was how I beat the boss. That is, in a nutshell, how to deal with Faction Wars. I realize it may not be an all-encompassing video for every single faction. It is really, really hard to do that. Building your damage dealers to do damage, very, very helpful. If you can build them in Savage gear, even more helpful because they will do a lot more damage. A good damage dealer can cover up a lot of other sins on lack of other things on your team. A good reviver and healer can also cover up a lot of sins. That is part of why the Barbarians is particularly easy, because Syl is such a good reviver and healer that a well-built Syl can carry very mediocre Barbarians all the way through stage 21. I have not had Syl long enough to have built her out. I have got her, I just managed to 6-star her on this account, for example. I haven't booked her yet because I was focused booking Brogni because Brogni was more important for other areas in the account. But Syl is going to get me these other 12 stars in Barbarians sooner or later because she's well built. High Elves, fairly easy because Arbiter is a very good healer and reviver and does a lot of heavy lifting in a faction that otherwise might struggle because the champions are just kind of okay. You know, there's some factions that are still kind of a little rough. Ogryn can be a little rough, although to be fair, Ogryn normal is not as bad as Ogryn hard. You know, Demon Spawn can be kind of rough just because there's not a lot of revivers in Demon Spawn. Now we have Dur the Hungerer, and he's actually a very good champion, so that is very helpful. Undead has a very similar issue where there's not a lot of healers and revivers, so Undead can be very difficult to get through if you don't have like a Gorgorab, for example. Or in my case, I used Fabian, and Fabian managed to do a lot of heavy lifting as well because he gave me a lot of control against the waves and the bosses where I didn't need as much of the healing and the reviving, so Gorgorab was good enough for that as well. Sometimes it's going to struggle. Sometimes it is going to be literally a case of you just don't have the champions for that particular faction. Other times, maybe you might be able to outgear Faction Wars with a little bit of help. Don't forget your Great Hall. Don't forget your Great Hall for Live Arena as well. All of those things are certainly going to help you. And then make sure that you understand that you will possibly have to book champions for Faction Wars that you may never use anywhere else other than Faction Wars. If that gets you Lydia, that is a very good sacrifice because getting Lydia is the end goal of normal Faction Wars. Now, if you're working on hard Faction Wars rather than normal, I realize this was focused on normal Faction Wars. Hard Faction Wars is definitely its own piece of cake. It is definitely going to have some similar thoughts. There are champions you're probably going to have to book that you may not have wanted to book for some reason. There are champions that are going to be worth investing in for stages in hard Faction Wars. You're going to have to move gear around because the gear requirements are significantly more difficult, and that is where your Live Arena Great Hall can play a huge part in making Faction Wars easy for you as well. But hopefully this helps you get Lydia. Hopefully this gives you some insight to the ways that you can progress in Faction Wars. I realize this is definitely a drier video, a lot of explanations, a lot of talking, but hopefully you guys found this helpful. I certainly, if you ever want to hop in my Discord, I have a Discord that's down below. We talk about Raid all the time. I got plenty of helpful folks there. If you ever have a struggle with a particular faction, feel free to post your roster in there. We love helping folks out. I love helping folks out. I love doing the takeovers on CatHerder when I stream live on Twitch. There are so many ways that you can interact with me, and honestly, just leaving comments down below. Let me know some of your hardest factions. Let me know if there's something you think I missed on some of this stuff. Let me know where you're struggling in Faction Wars and where you think Faction Wars is pretty easy. Let me know if you've gotten Lydia. I love to hear all of this stuff. I love hearing from you as the Raid community. The Raid community is awesome. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. I really do appreciate all the love and all the support. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day, and until the next video, I am Bront CatHerder.